I want to tell you a story about a 17-year-old boy by the name of Joseph. His father was named Jacob, his grandfather was Isaac, and his great-grandfather was named Abraham. Jacob had Joseph in his old age, and he already had 10 other kids by maidservants, 2 other women, and his brothers knew it. They knew that Joseph seemed to be the favorite, usually I guess because of you're young, and plus Joseph mother was Jacob's true love, Rachel. But his brothers didn't like him. And they were much older, and him being younger, you probably can imagine being in your old age, you're going to show a little bit more favoritism toward the young compared to the older brothers. But his brothers knew it, and they didn't like him. But anyhow, Joseph told his brothers about a dream that he had. And he talked about he was, of course, tending to a bundle of grain, and his grain stood upright. And his brothers' grain, their bundle bowed low below his. Now, of course, they said, well, what do you think, you're going to be our king now? You're going to reign over us? And that made them hate him even more. Can you imagine having siblings and someone of your siblings hate you? Wow. But anyhow, he had another dream, and he shared that dream with his brothers, and he told them about a sun, a moon, and 11 stars that bowed below him. And of course, he told the same to his father with his brothers together. And of course, his father probably said something, oh boy, shut up, you're making nonsense. Because he can see how he's agitating his brothers by saying stuff like that. So what, we're all going to bow below you now? You're going to be ruler over all of us, including mom, dad? I'm just saying, think about that. So they hated him even more so. But his dad still was curious. But you can imagine trying to diffuse the situation maybe at the dinner table, just saying, okay? And so as the brothers were out in the pasture, certain location, and his father, Jacob, told him to go and check up on the boys and come back and bring him a report. As he was approaching his brothers, they said, look, there's the dreamer. Let's kill him. Wow. Can you imagine your brothers or even sister or even parents want to kill you? All because they hated him because he was considered a favorite. Look, here's the dreamer coming. Let's kill him and let's throw him in the cistern. So, but then you had the older brother, Reuben. He was against them, wanted to kill Joseph. And he said, well, let's just throw him in the cistern. But Reuben's plan was to come back later on and rescue him and take him back to his father, okay? But what happened was you had some Midianite traders coming through, and also AKA Ishmaelites. So they were coming through on camels in a caravan. And so it was said, let's sell him to those traders, and which they did. They sold him for 20 pieces of silver, to the Ishmaelites who were on their way to Egypt. And upon arriving to Egypt, the Ishmaelites traders then sold Joseph to Potiphar, and he was the captain of the guard to Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt. And he worked in Potiphar's house for about 11 years as a slave. Some may say a servant. But he was purchased, bought, and he worked for Potiphar. And everything that he did for Potiphar, he had successes. And Potiphar put him in charge to manage all of his affairs. And it prospered under Joseph's hand. But Joseph was a well-built young man, and he was good looking. And Potiphar's wife had an eye on him. She was lusting after him. So she made a play on him, and in which Joseph rejected her advances, and because he was loyal to Potiphar. And you can imagine that. His wife coming on to you. And when he rejected her, you can imagine she was probably not too happy about that. And so he tried to leave, and she grabbed his coat and he fled the scene. When her husband got home, well, not just that, she shouted probably, rape, rape, where other people can come in and hear, here, I got his coat, you know. And this is the man who did this. We know who this belongs to. I'm just saying, okay? I'm just ad-libbing this, adding to it. And when Potiphar comes home, he takes what his wife says to be true, and he have Joseph placed in prison. Imagine that. Put in prison for a crime that you didn't even commit. Imagine, let's look at something here. Your brothers wanted to kill you. Then they throw you in a cistern. And when Reuben come back to check on you, you're gone. And then they told him that you've been, sold for 20 pieces of silver to the Midianite traders, the Ishmaelites, and who in turn sold you to Potiphar, an Egyptian soldier, an Egyptian captain of the guard for Pharaoh. Then his wife comes on to you. You rejects her out of your loyalty to Potiphar. And then she falsely claims attempted rape, and you're thrown in prison. Wow. Now, while in prison, there are a couple of interesting guys that also adds to this story, who was the chief baker and chief cupbearer to Pharaoh. Pharaoh was not pleased with them for some reason and had them thrown also in the dungeon in prison. And while there, the chief baker and chief cupbearer had dreams that night, and they told Joseph about their dreams. And Joseph interpreted their dreams for them. And he told the chief cupbearer that in 3 days he would be restored to his former position as cupbearer for Pharaoh. And on the other hand, the baker, he would be executed and propelled on a pole. Wow, imagine getting news like that. Now, first of all, you don't know this guy, Joseph, and you're thinking, oh yeah, sure, this is not going to be true, But in 3 days, it happened just exactly as he said. But not before. The thing is that Joseph told the cupbearer, when you get out of this place, make sure that you put a good word in for me to get me out of here. 2 years pass. Joseph's still in prison. And when you think about sometimes how things happen, it's not on our timetable, but it's all part of God's, plan. So all of a sudden now we come to a stage of Pharaoh. Pharaoh has a dream. Pharaoh's standing near the Nile River when he sees 7 fat cows that come out of the river. And, grazing, everything's going good. But then also he sees 7, skinny, scrawny cows also. And then so later he falls asleep and he has another dream. And in that dream, he sees 7 good, heads of grain or corn or whatever you want to call it on one stalk. And then on the opposite side of that, 7, bad looking, probably dried up, heads of grain, and that was being destroyed by the east wind. And he summoned all the wise men and magicians in Egypt to interpret his dream. No one could. And you can imagine, you better not be wrong. So it's best to be on the safe side, because you don't know, you might be beheaded by Pharaoh if you give the wrong answer and it doesn't come to be true or whatever. So, but what happened here, all of a sudden, the cupbearer, he remembered 2 years ago when that person in prison told him, don't forget about me. And so all of a sudden at that point, what was told came to remembrance. And he told Pharaoh about it, that he met this Hebrew in prison and who interpreted their dreams, and it came about just as he said, that he was restored as cupbearer, in other words, like a butler, and then the chief baker was executed and killed, just as he said. And so Pharaoh had them immediately go to the dungeon and summon Joseph. Of course, they had to clean him up. Then they brought him before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh told him exactly about what his dream was. And in his dream, the first dream he had, he was standing by the Nile, and out of the water came, 7 fat cows. And they were grazing, on the land. Everything seemed to be plentiful. And right behind that came 7 thin, scrawny cows. And from that, the 7 scrawny cows ate up the 7 fat cows. And then he fell asleep. Then he had another dream. And in that dream, he had one stalk with 7 heads of grain, healthy grain that came up. And then following that, there were 7 thin, scrawny heads of grain that followed, and that was dried by the east wind, and they in turn consumed the 7 healthy heads of grain. And Joseph had interpreted the dreams for him and told him, the dreams are both the same. The 7 healthy cows compared to the 7 scrawny cows, and the 7 scrawny ate up the healthy. He said that, and of course the same with the grain. And he said to Pharaoh that you're going to have 7 years of abundance, 7 years of plenty. Everything was going to be flourishing. It's going to be great upon the land, but also followed by 7 years of famine. And he said that it was going to happen soon. And in doing so, Pharaoh asked, as far as who among us that he can appoint to make certain to accomplish this task, to prepare for it. And so Pharaoh decided to appoint Joseph, the one who had considered wanted to be killed by his brothers, who threw him in the dungeon, who sold him for slavery, who sold him to Potiphar. Potiphar's wife accused him of attempted rape, threw him in prison. In prison for 2 years. The cupbearer forgets to tell Pharaoh about him being falsely accused and in prison and so forth, and kidnapped, sold into slavery. But what timing it was, because Pharaoh had 2 dreams. And then you had Joseph, the dreamer, to interpret those dreams. So, but through the time of Joseph working for Potiphar, managing all of his affairs, he developed some skills. He developed management skills. And so Pharaoh appointed him to manage the project, because Joseph told him, you'll need someone, a commissioner, someone who's a supervisor to oversee this, let them know what needs to be done to prepare, for the hard times, all the good that was coming, to prepare for that. And he also gave him an economic lesson by saying, take 1/5 of everything that's grown and store it. And he did not appoint himself. He didn't even suggest himself to Pharaoh. He suggested to Pharaoh to appoint someone to do this. But Pharaoh looked at him saying, you're the wisest man of all the land, appointed Joseph. Imagine going from prison to the top. And Pharaoh gave him a necklace and put a ring on him, and some new threads, some new clothes, and put him second in charge. In other words, a leader of all the land. The only one that was above him was Pharaoh himself. And he gave him the second in command chariot that he would ride in. And so when he's going through the land, you had people before him would say, bow, because he was such a man of importance. Imagine that. A Hebrew boy, 17 years of age, thrown in a pit, sold into slavery, worked as a servant, as a slave for 11 years, falsely accused, placed in prison for 2 years, now rose to prominence as the second a governor of all the land of Egypt. Wow, that's something to think about. Now, as Joseph oversees everything, he scours the land, inspects the land and everything, and now he appoints supervisors as well to do things, just like he had said to Pharaoh what needs to be done. He was doing it. And 7 years of plenty. But then, ultimately, the 7 years of famine came upon the land. And when famine comes, it's not like today's time where we have a whole lot of goods stored up for years, canned goods and everything else, survival kits, food and water, how we can store stuff for a very long time. It was not like that in that time, how they can store everything for that length of time. And it happened just as his dream said, because he told Pharaoh, it's not him that does this, it's God. God is the one that interprets dreams. He's just the instrument of saying it. But anyhow, all the countries surrounding Egypt was experiencing the famine. And of course, ultimately, started hit Egypt last. And there we have, going back to his brothers, there's dad, Jacob. Because by the way, his brothers told the father that what they had done, they had gotten some type of, I think, goat's blood and sprinkled on the coat of many colors and took it to his father and said, and his father, he was so upset and believed that a wild animals had killed his son. So there you have Jacob thinking that Joseph was dead because the lie that his brothers had formulated and was still holding firm to it many, many years later. But now, see how things come back around. And his dad, Jacob, told him he hears that there's grain in Egypt and wanted his sons to go to Egypt and purchase some grain for them and their families in their village so that, they wouldn't die. So the boys go there to Egypt and they come in front of Joseph, but they don't know it's Joseph because keep in mind, he's well dressed, has on the signatures of Pharaoh that handed him the power and command. And there they are, and of course they brought money as well to purchase grain. But then, can you imagine your brother know who they are? And he can also speak Egyptian now. But the thing is, his brothers don't know who he is, who Joseph is. And then Joseph, I guess, kind of like plays a little game with him. I guess in a way too, you can also look at a little punishment to get back in a sense, but not necessarily. And he says, you're here to spy upon us. But first of all, he asked them about who they were and all of this. And they tell him, that, it was how many brothers there were of them. And of course, one that was no longer with them. And that they had another brother back and they told him who he was. His name was Benjamin. He and Jacob, of course, had the same mom and dad, Rachel, who died in childbirth. But the thing is, Joseph, he used that, was basically saying, you are spies. Bring your brother back to me, then I know that you're not spies. And and then they said something to the effect about, if you don't bring back, something about not show you will not see my face again if you don't bring, your brother back. So instead of throwing them all, what he did do, let me back up. When he said you're spies, and so what Joseph did, he threw them in jail, threw them in prison for 3 days. And then brought them back, then when they came back out, and he asked them a lot more questions, and they told him about his brother, and he said, well, bring your brother before me, and that way I know that you're not spies. And very interesting. So he kept one of the brothers back while the others returned. He gave them plenty of grain for them, and not just that, he put their money back in their sacks so that they know. So when they stopped along the way, one of the brothers realized, hey, here's my money that's in the sack. That must have been a mistake. Something happened. He must have forgot to take our money, whatever the case may have said. And you can imagine how frightened they were then, because they knew you cross the Egyptians, the leaders like that, most likely you're going to be killed because an example's got to be set. So they go back home, they take the grain and they tell their dad Jacob about what happened. Then all the grain get used, just about used up. And so Jacob now, since his brother, one of his brothers to go back to Egypt and buy some more grain, food that they need to have. And this time he decides to put double the money that they put last time, including some other things and things that they had that they wanted to give the Egyptians for the trade. But they told him, well, you know what Joseph had said, who's second in command, who's the governor of Egypt, that to bring their brother. And Jacob didn't want to let Benjamin go. He was the youngest. He didn't want to let him go. But then one of the brothers said, well, if we don't take him, we're all going to die anyway from starvation, from the famine. So he allowed it, but also he doubled up the payment that they had last time. So now they go back before the governor, who's Joseph. They bring their brother, and that you can imagine what Joseph was feeling during that time. And how, when he asked them all sorts of questions about the family, about their dad, and hear them talk, and how he couldn't hardly contain himself. And he had to step away for a moment, but still he could not let on that he was their brother. So now what he does, I'm trying to make a long story short. So now he gives them the grain and everything they need. So he gives them the grain and things they need for their land to take back to Canaan. But this time he gives his manager, he gives instructions to his manager to put his signature cup, in Benjamin's bag. And he said, wait till they get out so far, then I want you to go and, of course, approach him again and go into the bag and say, the person that this cup is found in, will go back with him, which was Benjamin's bag, because it was planned, it was orchestrated, it was intentional. So they all go back to Egypt. And then you have the brothers, they're begging and pleading. I don't know if it was Judah. I think it was Judah. But they was begging and pleading with Jacob to not take the brother. He was begging and pleading, take me. I'll be your slave. I'll be your servant. Because they started talking about their father and his white hair, his old age, that if he take the boy, he's going to surely die. And kind of slim this down a little bit. And I may be off track a little bit, but you're going to get the gist of what I'm saying here in a minute. So finally Joseph have all the Egyptian servants leave out the room. And he tells his brother who he is, that he was Joseph. You can imagine the emotions, the feelings that was going on in there. And wow. And he fills up everything they need, and he tells them that to go get their father and bring him and everybody else back to Egypt, because this was during a famine time, and that he was going to approach Pharaoh about his father, his family. Pharaoh was elated about Joseph's family, and of course Joseph asked for them to be placed in a certain particular section of land because they were, sheep herders and so forth. And wow, can you imagine? And then he goes home, tells Jacob, and how pleased he was. So Jacob and everyone comes back. Plus, he gives him I forgot how many donkeys. A lot of donkeys. He gives them the chariots, wagons, or whatever to bring for the women and children to ride in, to really make it special. So now they all come to Egypt. Jacob sees him. You can imagine what a wonderful sight that was, knowing that his son wasn't dead after all these years. And then you talk about the grand feast and Pharaoh's approval. How all of these things happen. Now, here's the gist of this story, what I was getting at. Let's look at what's going on in our country today in America. What lessons can we learn from brothers wanting to kill you? Brothers throwing you in a pit? Brothers selling you into slavery? Then the traders too sell you into slavery. Then false allegations of a woman who then has him thrown into prison for 2 years. Then he's out of prison and rose to prominence. And the great thing about all of this is Joseph didn't have any ill feelings toward any of them. Imagine when Joseph rose to power and Potiphar knew his position, knew this man who he threw in prison, imagine what his wife might have been thinking about. Oh, he's going to get us now because she lied. And we know things like that happen because there's just sin on the world. People always somewhere is just not going to act right and do right. But think about this. He had every right, so some would say, to seek revenge on them all because he had the power. He had the power, life and death, of those that he saw in the land. Imagine that. But he did not harbor any ill will against anybody. He didn't. Not just that, he blessed them. Because everything that Joseph did flourished in his hands. And he did exactly what God wanted him to do. And he was a child of God, and he obeyed God, and he harbored no ill will against anybody. Can we do that today in our land in America? Can we? Despite what the country have gone through, despite slavery, despite false accusations, despite police brutality, false imprisonment, extended, exaggerated periods of imprisonment, can we forgive like Joseph and move forward to a better and brighter day for everybody? That's something we need to do. That's something we must do. Today, what I just shared with you is a true story. And it's a story that you can find in the book of Genesis, the 37th chapter through the 50th chapter in the book of Genesis. I encourage you, read it. And if it's too much King James, try the NIV, the New Living Translation version. I'll also encourage you, get the Bible app, because that way you can even read the story to you. And I highly encourage that. But this is the time in today's time that we need to hear this more than ever, because we're going through something that's unprecedented in our time. And we need to get back to what the Word of God tells us to do. We need to be like Joseph. Every last one of us, each of us, we need to be like Joseph. Because it's in the book for a reason. And today's times is that reason. God bless you. God restore America and bless us again. Amen. Amen.